CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. Welcome to the 2020 Chile Tech Talk, Maintaining the Connection. Thank you for joining us to learn and share about today's technology and how it keeps us connected in many ways to support our work, our families, friends, homes, and communities. A special thank you to our Chile Public Policy Hill Briefing sponsor, Accenture. Thank you for supporting today's Tech Talk and also for supporting the Chile Global Leaders Internship and Fellowship Program. And now we will begin with remarks by Chile Congressional members, Representative Darren Soto and Representative William Hurd.
Hello, I'm Congressman Darren Soto, and I'm honored to be able to address you at CHLI's Tech Talk. The relationship between Hispanics and the advancements of technology is strong. And we've seen how technology has helped us during the many crises we face in this moment in American history. From COVID-19 to the racial injustices we've seen with the death of George Floyd and proclaiming that Black Lives Matter, we've seen technology step up to help out with so many of these issues. For so many workers who were at home during the stay-at-home orders, they were able to find work through the gig economy, whether you were a computer programmer, a graphic designer, or a Lyft or Uber driver. Our economy continued to be able to move forward. We also saw consumers really double down on amazing new options of getting any number of consumer goods, food, medicines, and other essential services brought right to their doorstep. We also saw telework be implemented in many companies and local, state, and our federal government across this nation as we did our best to help flatten the curve and continue to do so. We also saw telehealth be advanced. In the first COVID-19 response legislation, we expanded telehealth to apply to many Medicare services. And we saw hospitals follow suit and many other healthcare services, expanding access. And this also poses key issues for the Hispanic community as we work to make sure Hispanics living in rural areas and our farm workers, as well as those in socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods in urban areas, get better access to broadband services. Even with police body cameras and cameras in public spaces that help law enforcement, we've seen police body cameras help level the playing field and making sure that interactions between law enforcement and our citizens are well documented. But it's faced challenges. When we've seen some of these video programs in public spaces, they've mistaken many Hispanics, even members of Congress, for wanted criminals. It shows we have a long way to go. I'm honored to work on the Energy and Commerce Committee and on several tech subcommittees, including telecommunications and technology, as well as consumer protection, to help resolve some of these main challenges facing technology both in the Hispanic community and across America. And I'm joined by amazing members like Congresswoman Barragan, Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, Congressman Cardenas, Congressman Ruiz, and Congressman Flores. And we have been put to work to help deal with creating a more diverse tech industry that is right now dominated predominantly by white and Asian men. We're also working to help protect internet privacy, boost cryptocurrency, help advance quantum computing and artificial intelligence, all while making sure that we could keep our supply chains here in the United States. And we're also combating racial bias. We know these are some of the main issues affecting the Hispanic community with regard to technology, that much of the program isn't necessarily taking totally into account our racial differences, our cultural differences. And that's why our journey to make sure we can diversify tech and to help end racial bias in computing is so critical. But I have a lot of hope. We see technology being embraced by young Hispanics at a higher level than many other groups across the United States, whether it's using internet on laptops, on smart pads, or on our cell phones, whether it's engaging in social platforms, we see young Hispanics actively engaged in really shaping the technological future. And we all have a responsibility to help out our abuelos and abuelas to help integrate them into everything from telework and telehealth to being able to establish basic financial accounts online. I'm proud to be part of this effort. I really appreciate the great work that CHLI is doing to help continue to advance Hispanics in the tech movement, both across our nation and across the world. And I look forward to continuing these conversations going forward. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Hey there, Chili. Sorry I couldn't be with y'all today for your discussion on technology, but I'm in transit back to Washington, D.C. I'm grateful to the awesome Chili team for giving me the opportunity to still share some perspectives on a few things I'm working on in Congress in the area of technology. I always say that as a civilization, we must take advantage of technology before it takes advantage of us. The technological change that the United States and the world is going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant. The United States has prospered because we have had a competitive advantage over other countries in so many different areas of technology. And we have to maintain that competitive advantage in the technologies that will rule the future, technologies like AI and quantum computing. We are in a geopolitical struggle over who will gain mastery over these technologies first, and there will be no second place. China is the greatest threat we face as they try to become the world's next superpower, and the Chinese government will lie, cheat, and steal in their attempt to achieve this goal. One technology that is defining this geopolitical struggle is AI. That's why for the past year, I have partnered with my colleague and friend, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and the Bipartisan Policy Center to develop a national AI strategy. By bringing experts from the private sector and the public sectors together, we can develop a framework to spur the development of AI while protecting individual privacy, avoiding bias, and promoting economic and social inclusion. Technology is not only a tool within this geopolitical struggle, but it's also an important tool for domestic tranquility. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen technology work in our favor, but we've also seen how the technological capabilities of our states and municipalities need to improve. Given the fact that states have been the epicenter of this pandemic by providing regional health information, conducting testing and contact tracing, as well as issuing important resources like unemployment assistance, it's so important that our states and local governments have modern digital infrastructure that is safe and secure. That's why I've been working with my colleagues on how through the next stimulus package, we can use federal dollars to spur digital modernization efforts at the state and local level. These are just two problem sets that technology can help us deal with. And I'm sure during y'all's conversations today, you will learn about and discuss much more. I'm glad Chile has convened such great young minds together because y'all are the ones that are going to make sure we not only excel in the 21st century, but that we are even more prepared for the 22nd century. God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
Well, great. Well, thanks again to our Chile congressional members, Representative Darren Soto and Representative William Hurd. We appreciate their service, and we look forward to their engagement in other discussions as we have in the past and in today. So we're going to get right to our panel discussion. And for this discussion, I want to introduce the members of this panel. We have Jorge Lopez, who is the Vice President and Distinguished Analyst at Gartner, Yesenia Reyes, Managing Director at Accenture, and David Olivencia, who serves as the Health and Public Service Cloud Advisory Executive and Managing Director at Accenture. Thanks again for joining us, Jorge, Yesenia, and David. So we've got a few questions here, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll get some questions going. I do have some questions in particular for each of you. And in this environment here, it's not like we can do it in person where, we start talking a little bit over each other. So if somebody has something to contribute, just jump in and contribute. And then we'll wrap up with the Q&A before we introduce the keynote speaker. So first off, the two members talked about COVID, the new normal. So David, the first question is to you, dear. The COVID-19 has a particular impact on health services. Doctors' offices have been shutting down and some have been moving into telemedicine. From your position, do you see the health field adjusting to this new telemedicine services across the board?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, they are adjusting in a major way, and they almost have to, right? Prior to that, Marianne, I'd just like to say thank you, and thank you, CHLI, right, for all you do. And I don't know, this is the third or fourth year or so that we've been doing these CHLI Tech Talks to help there. So that's great, and it's an honor to be joined by this distinguished group of panelists as well. Yeah, it's been amazing, right? What's happened over the last several months. If you look, it's kind of hit on a couple different things. One is, I think for our hospitals and it's almost all industries, there's this ability to be more agile, the ability to adapt, to flex, whether it's how you shift floors in your buildings, to how do you enable more telemedicine and all the things that you need in place to make telemedicine happen. The technology at the endpoints, making sure the right people who are executing it have the right technology, and making sure that it's secure. But I think the other thing that this has opened up is the future and other areas that we can use technology for. One area is how you collaborate. So when you have now, remember the other thing too is families couldn't come to go visit when somebody was sick or ill. So how do you leverage technology in a safe, secure way to give families visibility into what the progress is and the steps are? So you saw a bit of that. You're also seeing, there's also new applications for virtual reality and how you can, you look at some of the more mental stress that has been, posed to some of the citizens of this country, and how virtual reality is being leveraged. And I think far beyond, as you look at just, as we talk about CHLI and Tech Talk, right? These are short-term things that I think our healthcare industry has been able to go through. I think longer term, it's just an exciting field in that if you look at all the data that's getting generated from, devices that we, our smartwatches, scales, all kinds of different things that we're going to have to put out data on our health. And then all the analytics that run behind the scenes, the AI that Congressman Hurd talked about, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the quantum, that you're going to be able to get predictive medicine, right? That takes all this data in and knows well before an incident happens what's going to be happening to you, so you can prepare and more proactively go after that. So those are, Marianne, those are some of the things that I think, hospitals are adjusting to in the short term. I think longer term, it's just this whole area of healthcare, it's just very exciting. There's so much technology behind it. It's such a major component of our GDP in terms of what we spend. And the more we can use technology to impact outcomes, make us healthier, a lot of tech is going to be a huge driver for that.
Good. So thank you, David. And we may have some questions about that as a follow-up too. So kind of the next question here is for Yesenia, kind of piggybacking a little bit on what David was referring to in the different industries, but government in particular, right? So we just got video remarks from two of our congressional members, and things have also changed in the U.S. Congress and on Capitol Hill. So like many of those industries affected, from a government perspective, some of the government offices and projects across the country have also paused. And some have reduced their functions to what they consider are core duties or maintenance or functions. With your experience, Yesenia, in large government transformation projects, please share a couple of the difficulties that our government officers are facing with transitioning to the remote work or telework or televoting, whatever that might be.
I think you're on mute, Yesenia. Yeah.
I'm live now.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne, for the question. And once more, I echo David's gratitude at being able to be here with you, and for everyone attending. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. You're right, Marianne. Government organizations are facing, right, just really dynamic shifts in the way that they traditionally have organized and have expressed themselves, to their citizenry. I happen to work in our government organizations where we're doing large scale transformation across finance operations, HR operations, and the area that I really focus on is on talent and human potential. So one of the biggest shifts and one of the biggest challenges that government organizations are facing as they've transitioned into a work from home or work from anywhere model is deciding which services stay at the forefront, and therefore how do you organize the workforce to support those services. That leads to just different enablement challenges that governments have faced. One is do they have the technology, the platforms, the physical equipment that we're able to move quickly into the work from home model, right? That required thinking about logistics and a different way of supporting from a technology perspective. How do you organize work? How do you supervise and manage employees? How do you keep employee engagement alive and thriving? Those were some of the immediate challenges. And as the weeks have continued to add on, to this new way of organizing, the challenges that now organizations face is how do you keep sustained engagement, right? When families are now, when the demands of one's life are multidimensional and all in one space, there is no drive time to decompress from the workplace. There is no transition where the children are being attended to in school or in after school activities. And so now the workplace needs to account for, how does it organize itself in time so that there are these transitions that are needed for the multiple dimensions of an employee's reality that they need to deal with, right? How do we create blocks of times when we're not on the 12th Zoom call for the day without these opportunities for people to be realistic about the responsibilities that they're balancing due to the pandemic, due to the shift, and the personal obligations. And as David mentioned, right, more and more employers, regardless of where they sit, from an organizational background, employers need to be more tuned into engagement because there are more mental health matters that need to be addressed by the workplace, bringing in the need for our HR organizations to be considering what are the support services around employees. What is the engagement model when we're going to be remote? What is the learning model, right? How do we, again, have constructive and effective communications? So the work environment has really had great opportunities because it has shown resilience. It has shown that people can pivot to new ways of working. And the opportunity now for organizational leaders is to take a deeper look into how do we sustain support, how do we sustain engagement, how do we organize work so that it makes sense for the services, and let's be real, the budget constraints that every organization is facing. So it's got real opportunities in effective organizational change. How will they, as technologies keep coming on board, as more and more applications are available to us to do great collaboration, there has to be a lens and there has to be an opportunity to think through the employee experience, the leadership, the culture dimensions of the workplace. There's no break room anymore to go to. A lot of relationships have been built and sustained through that natural, ebb and flow of movement in a workspace. When that's no longer available, we need to be thinking about engagement and how do we create coaching and mentoring, leadership opportunities, how do we manage and supervise work? How do we give feedback? And how do we communicate in an environment where everything is coming in from a phone call or an email, right? It's just a different lens to communication. Lots of opportunity.
That was a lot, Yesenia. Oh my God.
You can't tell that I've been thinking about this topic.
Yeah, so it reminded me, just talking about like all these virtual platforms now. We had, just from a CHLI standpoint, we had an executive committee meeting, and I specifically put in the email and the communication, there's going to be an audio call. Don't worry about video. It's all cool. And about 3 members, are texting me in the middle of just before they're getting on, like, I can't see anybody. I can't see anybody. And I'm thinking, wow, we've come this far in such a short time where now the expectation is that if we're going to get together, that it's virtual, that it's a video, that it's a video conversation. And so it's not even like just an audio, it has to be FaceTime now. And in all of this, we had to show my mom how to use FaceTime because she had a phone, but she never used that before, right? So a lot of different opportunities, a lot of ways to actually, all of us kind of just use and be creative with our minds and kind of think of things differently. And kind of going down this path here of moving forward and planning ahead, as both Congressman William Hurd and Darren Soto mentioned. Jorge, this next question here kind of encompasses that for you. You have a depth and breadth of experience and knowledge. And specifically, I'm curious if you can share with us here, where is the digital business heading and how does that impact things like AI that were mentioned earlier and autonomous business?
Well, thank you, Marianne, and thank you to everyone who's viewing and watching this, because we really appreciate your attention, and we hope you'll find this valuable. And also thank you to all fellow panelists. I think that we were thinking digital business was heading in a particular direction before the pandemic hit. And simply stated, those enterprises that were, and even government entities that were already advanced in implementing their version of digital business found themselves far more capable of dealing with the uncertainty and the rapid changes than those who were not. So consequently, we have a situation where there are companies that are now telling us that rather than think about the fact that we have a pandemic and then an ensuing recession and then social uncertainty, they're focusing on the fact that they're doubling down on digital business. They're finding that they must, in fact, get to this future more rapidly than before. And they're seeing this for a number of reasons. One is we've identified, because of the pandemic, something that we call an exponential crisis or exponential threat. And that is something that is just grows so rapidly and so large that it overwhelms the ability of existing institutions to take them on. And so we're examining how, in fact, the existing institutions can change to be more responsive to what we think is going to be a continuing set of crises ahead, and to do so, and also to be able to manage it in a way that it provides a way forward that maybe even for the less dramatic crises, we learn some things about how to move more quickly. So we call this digital business acceleration, and it looks at three things. It looks at what we call new institutions. How can we restructure, rethink institutions that were designed to perform in the industrial era, to be able to have the capability, the flexibility, as well as scale required now in the digital era. We also talk about something called exponential response, and saying, so for example, if you look at what happened with COVID-19, the response was, I think, initially was difficult just because people thought it was business as usual. But eventually they started to center on the idea that we're going to get the very best minds of the entire world, no matter where they are, and connect them together to try to figure out how do we defeat this virus and go against it. The third addresses your question about AI, and we see the emergence of autonomous operations. And so AI, in the sense of what we've been hearing about, has very many different directions and threads. What we found is the place where we're going to see it really grow dramatically is where you can make money and provide service to customers. And so autonomous operations is an example of that. In the government sector, for example, we've been looking at a number of cities that if you've ever had to apply for a business permit before, if you worked in that sort of area of a municipality, it can take you months and sometimes even years to get a business permit. And they're using AI now in a number of European as well as in China, in some cities, to take care of a lot of the mundane but very detailed information, to come to some recommendation so that people that are in charge of it can then move forward much more quickly and therefore improve the the performance of a particular agency. So we're going to see a lot more of that. When it comes to the commercial environment, a great example amongst many is what's happening in mining. We can see now what's called a fully autonomous mine, where you have trucks that are 52 feet tall by Caterpillar, are moving along with no human driver in them. And they're working with other machinery that's also not requiring humans to operate. And now they do require humans to service them. So rather than think that we're going to see a whole world without employment for humans, it's going to create a whole new class of employment, will be very different, and in fact will play well to those who continue to pursue education, to keep learning about this future. So I think that the story, Marianne, would have been different had there been no pandemic. Would have been a little bit more leisurely maybe. But what happened was, with the pandemic, really raised the stakes, the fear and the urgency of moving toward digital business. You're going to see that. I mean, in fact, it's more than something that's going to happen. It's a future. It's already happening now. And we're going to see manifestations of that. There's going to be economic impacts in a very positive way, we believe, coming into 2021.
Well, thank you. I'm jotting down some notes here, and you were mentioning, the positive impacts, the opportunities. I may come back to if we have time, and before we get to the Q&A, just to kind of pose a question to the three of you now to kind of be thinking about it is, we hear from college students, high school students that are going into college about majors. And now we've got, for the longest time it was STEM, and then it was STREAM. And now it's like all of us have become somewhat of STEM students. My question is going to be along the lines of what is it that beyond a STEM major, our new generation now of college students and young professionals and high school students should be thinking about, and what are some tips for them to excel in this new normal with digital? So kind of keep that, we'll come back to that. But kind of launching here back to David in regards to the exponential threats that Jorge mentioned a little bit earlier. I want to touch, David, on cybersecurity, because that's been a concern. Obviously, the members of Congress also kind of touched on that a little bit as well. From your perspective, from your company or trade association, are you familiar with any current bills or legislation or initiatives that Congress is working on, or maybe that they should consider to ensure that patient information and other private information is not impacted by potential bad actors, specifically, again, in your area of expertise in health, but I know you're familiar with a lot of others, so please, if you can address this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's always ongoing, I mean, there's been laws that have been passed. I mean, HIPAA and other things that I think everybody are familiar with. And I think there's continuous efforts to look at those and make sure that they're, continuously improved. And I think that should always continue. I think Jorge did an excellent job of just laying out a little bit of kind of where we're going in the future and how important security is going to be. And, and Marianne, you talked about, areas of learning, right? I think security is just a huge area. If those who are, I saw some of the names of the attendees, some familiar faces, so great to see them, and some new faces as well. So that's great. But security is just a great area. But the backdrop is, even today, right? You think about all the applications we access, all the passwords externally, but then internal to our own companies. But now you're moving into a world, right, where I always say this, it's exponential, right? Exponential data, exponential devices, Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, robots, watches, cars. Jorge talked about mining. There's like devices and robots that are going to mines, rockets, all this, airplanes, all this stuff is creating tons and tons and tons of data, growing exponentially, that now need to be secured, right? And so it's going to get, and they're all over the place, right? They're not just like in one spot like they used to be. So it's going to make this job of securing, securing data, making sure it's, on one side secure, but also accessible, right? You lock it down too much, you can't access it. So you want a little bit of both. It's going to be a huge opportunity, but also from a policy perspective, right? Making sure you got the right policies and you see, I mean, I think we can't open up a paper, a week. We can't go by a week without reading of a breach happening somewhere to somebody at some point. And this has happened over years. And I don't think it's going to get any easier. It's going to be actually even harder and harder to stay secure. So security, from a healthcare perspective, continuously going to be more important, because all those impacts that I talked about, the Internet of Things, I jump on my scale, all this data that's getting put out about me, right? Or any of us, right? Is going to become increasingly available in a lot of different places, running a lot of, in addition to security, is also the ethical, kind of the ethical things around that as well. But hopefully that answers your question, Marianne.
Yeah, thank you. And we may have some other, well, did anybody, Jorge or Yesenia, did you want to add to that, to the cybersecurity aspect? Anything?
I think that David is spot on in the sense that the sheer rapid growth is also going to create new opportunities and new vulnerabilities at a rate we've never even considered before. And so, to some extent, we're going to be looking at the question earlier about AI. How can AI be used to step in to spot those things? And one thing too that I thought I'd mention too from a personal perspective is that we assume as individuals that it's the world out there of information and data and intelligence that's against the individual. And it's asymmetric in the sense that we feel like we're vulnerable and we have no defenses, but you're going to start seeing a class of capabilities develop that will be, in essence, like your protector, somebody that takes your interest at heart and works to fight off somebody's going to go into your bank account or go into and threaten you on a personal basis. And that will start to grow in cyberspace as well. And I can't say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, what the implications are at this point, but it's something that is going to generate a whole set of new requirements and probably legislation as well.
So I want to come back to Yesenia. You shared a lot with us in the first question in regards to the government work and the projects that you work on. Wanted to kind of narrow it down a little bit, Yesenia, to talk a little bit more about employee engagement in particular. So what do you see that is currently working, and what maybe isn't working in relationship to communication, workflow, and employee engagement? And if you could, based on that, what's working and not now, what do you think is going to be the opportunity to kind of work or look to plan post-COVID? And again, I question, but I'm like, I don't know when post-COVID really is.
What is that?
I don't know that anybody really knows, but at least something that we can kind of consider what is happening now. I think we've all realized that there's a lot that we don't know, but just kind of some best practices and things that you've seen so far that might work. What do you think?
Sure. Well, I think what's working is that, in the shift to work from anywhere, I think a lot of, and especially, people that I have talked to have been delighted that the shift to do that was not technically hard, right? That people's responsibility, people have, productivity, creativity, collaboration did not diminish in the shift, right? And I think sometimes as organizations, we are afraid of that because what we can't see, we can't measure. And what this shift has taught us is that actually there are ways, to shift effectively and to measure and monitor, right, the work that happens to support the work, for the best possible outcome. And the enabler of that is clear communication and clarity around expected outcomes. And so, as I like what you said, Marianne. When is post-COVID, right? So let's just talk about, as the weeks go by, the opportunity for organizations to continue to look like, where can we continue to evolve the thinking and evolve the strength of the capability is going to be in organizations having really clear outcomes, so that as the work continues to be done in different places, people are clear about what is expected, and then they have the freedom to form the teams, to form the collaboration, to carve off the time to get it done. Because again, I think what's going to be unknowable and factors outside of the workplace that are going to impact the workplace is, one, for example, what will the go back to school look like? If there's going to be an alternate day approach or a morning here and an afternoon here, right? Whatever that looks like for those, for employees managing, family, education, responsibilities, the concept of 8 to 5 is kind of gone. And so, employees, organizations, managers, supervisors, leaders can start to be thinking about how does time evolve in this, in this more, in this different, in a more fluid day? How do we become even more clear about the outcomes and objectives that our individuals are going to be measured to? And how will those feedback mechanisms and sessions happen? Right. Again, there are a lot of the things that we are used to doing, and especially in public service and government organizations, is the face-to-face interaction permeates right deeply. And so the more thinking that we can be doing now on that employee experience, how will we onboard employees when there's not or how will we interview even employees when there are still some organizations that are used to, a series of gates, but an in-person interview was still part of the recruiting experience. What happens when it all becomes virtual? So how will we onboard, right? There's still a large element of learning and onboarding that is on the job, right? The things that we did and we learned because we were shadowing another person in their work day, right? We've got to be thinking about that. What are the small group coaching pods that might start to be developed so that new joiners still get a small group, to be able to use as their community of learning? How do we celebrate milestones even, right? Organizations need to celebrate, employees that celebrate big achievements, celebrate outcomes. What happens, how do we do that when we're not physically together? So that employee engagement has, just so many dimensions and so many opportunities. And what's working well is that, again, these collaboration tools are supporting the interaction. They are supporting creativity. People are able to, I think the other thing that this has enabled is people are willing to share more of themselves because life is happening, right, on the phone, live and in person. And so, so some of that, the cohesion that happens to support the employee engagement is getting even more and more authentic, more deep, because we're not putting on, kind of the persona of go to work, right? We're now truly human in all aspects of our life. And so in this virtual world, right, we've got to keep a lens on how will we recruit, right? How will we continue to skill and provide learning enablement, coaching and mentoring. Something that is really important in public sector organizations is that coaching, right, from our more senior leaders, right, from people that have had deep experience in their careers. And things that we still have to solve for is how are we going to solve for the always on, right? The email doesn't have it doesn't have hours of operation, right? Again, this marathon of Zoom calls requires a new way of understanding communication skills, right? We often say communication is a soft skill. It's actually a very technical skill, right? From the cues that we give verbally, non-verbally, from the way that we engage mentally, from the way that we engage physically. So the opportunities for employee engagement are going to be many, and they need to be thought about not only from a, how do we grow and coach an individual, how do we give them strong, constructive feedback, how do we give clear expectations, and how do we continue to enable the workforce as technology becomes, more and more, as more and more of it rolls out into our ecosystems. We do want for people to be available to do that, that critical thinking, those that kind of thinking about what's next in the organization. There's an opportunity for for chatbots and RPA and other technology to help take away the repetitive tasks to free people up for the more, for the more business outcome focused tasks. And yet we're going to have to enable that.
Great, well, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and remind everyone we're going to go ahead and start pretty soon here, moving into the Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat. And while you do that, I am going to circle back. Yesenia just talked a little bit about it, and I mentioned it earlier. So for Jorge and David, how do we, you all know, you have kids, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, we know so many young Latinos, very diverse students who just graduated from college or just graduated from high school and trying to figure out college. So what are some of your coaching, mentoring suggestions and recommendations for them as they navigate what this new normal is going to be, whether they studied in a technology field or not? What are some words of encouragement and wisdom you can share with them that apply to this technology? What should they be doing, or what should they be learning during this time? Jorge, you want to go first, or David?
I could go first. I have to say, I have 7 grandchildren, and the ages are 11, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And the 8-year-old was showing, they by the way, they sheltered in place here at our home in Texas. They were in Chicago in a high rise. So they all drove in one day down here to shelter with us. And it was very interesting to see. You know how the new iPhone allows facial recognition. So the 8-year-old had hacked my son's iPhone to get his own face in there. And they were able to play these video games into the night. So part of me says, just let them loose. And you're going to find that in fact, they're already, even at a very young age. I mean, I've got my 2-year-old grandson will get on the Facebook portal, and he'll be playing games with us that he picks out, and he can barely talk right now. So I'm just saying that we're seeing a generation that is growing up where living with the digital world is like for us reading a book or hearing a bedtime story. It's very different, and to some extent, if you're older, you have to run just to keep up. So I thought I'd mention that at least. David, I don't know what you're seeing.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, no, it's I have three kids, 17, 15, and 12, and I've been a very strong advocate of education my whole career. I think STEM is vital and will continue to be more and more important as we go into an exponential digital world. So regardless of what industry or career or role that you're going to have, I think it's important that, if you're younger on, that you build those core STEM skills. Whatever industry you go into, law, construction, airlines, whatever, it is all going to be impacted by technology to go better, cheaper, faster, and it's accelerating. So I think it's important that you're always aware of how technology is disrupting your industry and how other companies or people in your role, if you're doing sales, how is technology making sales per people better at their role? If you're in marketing or manufacturing or supply chain, technology is continuing to, increasing it better, but it's also driving efficiency. So I think for those who are, looking at their career or looking at future careers, understand where the puck is going and position yourself to get there. And it's, and underneath that core of that is being curious, being addicted to learning, and studying the different ways that your field, your profession, your field, or your industry is getting disrupted, and stay ahead of the game.
Yeah. No, thank you. So we have a couple, Yesenia, did you want to add anything to that, dear?
I did, because I believe all day long in all of the, the STEM fields, like all of those are important. And yet I think we're at a moment in time where we've got, there's an opportunity for, for those of us, for all of us to understand, psychology and sociology, how we, human-centered business, right? Everything that we do, technology is going to disrupt a person's life, a person's right trajectory. And so understanding the humanities, right? Critical and creative thinking, human-centered design, right? How do we make all of this, technology work for someone, right? How do we understand ethics and how do we apply ethics in a rapidly evolving world, right? So I think, all of those, lines of curiosity, right, that we call the liberal arts, are just as important today, in partnership with, with our STEM capabilities, because we are still, we are still in the people business. We are still trying to impact change upon, a community, and, and let that community thrive and be healthy. And so we need to have, equal skills in empathy, critical thinking, right, human-centered experience, sociology, psychology, inclusion, right? How do we, behavior, so that, we are not, so that we are not hurting one another in the evolution of all of this.
Yeah. So thank you. So one of the opportunities obviously that has come up is the different education platforms that have opened for a lot of students or people who just want to learn, right? Children and creative minds of all ages, right? So that, the subscriptions or the memberships have been paused or completely eliminated to open that type of knowledge. So that's been encouraging, because there's been other times when some of us in some of our communities growing up, myself included, growing up in a farm worker camp, we're not always included. And even though something may be available, it really isn't that available or accessible to some of us in our communities. And to kind of piggyback on that in that discussion there, we do have a question in relationship to the, from a company standpoint. So how can we ensure that companies, or how can we engage and get involved with companies to make sure that they're adapting to be inclusive and not leaving some of us behind, some of us in the communities that maybe don't have all that technology or that digital, or have to get in a car to go somewhere to get the Wi-Fi connection, or the family that has one device. And are there programs or resources out there that you know of right now that you can share with us and the audience that we can take back to help our communities? Jorge, yes, go ahead.
So I think that we're going to continue to see a gap between what companies do and engineers and scientists do and mathematicians do and what people need. But to me, that gap is the opening for where I think the true revolution ahead is, in that entrepreneurs are the ones that close the gap. They spot the need with the human-centered need, and they look at the available capabilities and they say, wow, they're not serving the humans. So let's step in here and create a company. Let's do a startup. So I think that what's led me to conclude over the past couple of years is that the most important aspect, STEM will still continue to be very important, but a way to talk about STEM is sort of like the NBA, is that who's going to be in the NBA typically by the time someone is 12 or 13, size, capabilities, talent, et cetera. It all just comes through and they're recruited early on. Similar things with STEM. Someone's really great at mathematics, at science, at engineering, and they tend, it's hard to have a late bloomer in those things. Not impossible, but in general they're found. But where people can really blossom at any age is as the entrepreneurs, where say, gosh, there's a need here, and the market and the companies have not provided it. Well, guess what? They're engineers. They don't understand. To Yesenia's point, they're not even human-centric people. I mean, they're product people and services people, and we may hope that they do it, but almost you prefer not, because their version of what's human-centric may not be anything you really want. It really opens the door for entrepreneurs in every region, every ethnic group, every even cohorts. You know, people who are older, people who are middle-aged, people who are younger, et cetera, can see that. And what is useful is to ensure that we don't have very many barriers to the entrepreneurs as they try new things. They fail a lot, and many times they'll make claims that are simply never substantiated because of that. But in general, over the long haul, you find that the ones that succeed are the ones that truly help move the society forward. I think that model, if anything, is only going to get become more important as you go forward.
Thank you. I wanted to add a few little things there. Go ahead, David.
No, I would add, as it relates to just inclusion, right, and making sure everybody's brought along. I mean, I think I'm very proud to work at Accenture, right, and we're sponsoring this. We've been a long sponsor of CHLI, and lots of organizations like CHLI, not only in the U.S. but around the world, and doing events like this. I mean, think about it, right? You got Jorge Lopez at one of the top. He's a senior executive at one of the top research technology firms in the world, right? Sharing his wisdom, sharing his perspective. You have Yesenia, again, very top senior executive at one of the largest, consulting firms in the world, sharing perspective, sharing insights, partnering with CHLI. This is recorded. This is scalable. It's also a two-way street. We're putting out great content, great perspectives. Our community needs to absorb this and learn and read it. So we need to step up, as well. So that was one. And another example, we partner with Girls Who Code globally, right, and helping grow that as well. It's another way to kind of grow and ensure the inclusion. And the last one is, it's kind of interesting. I grew up in the southeast side of Chicago, middle class. My parents at one time growing up, right, lived in public housing. The one asset that I think is there for everyone, that I think is one of the most underutilized assets in America, and now it's a little bit challenging though, is the library. I walk in the library sometimes, and it's like, what a great asset. And it's like, again, I just go back, it's a two-way street. We talk about inclusivity. We got libraries that are empty sometimes, and I think we need to step up. We need to get in the library. So that's my my answer there, Marianne.
I did get my digital library card so that I could check out books, because I was getting tired of buying all of them on Amazon.
Well, that's the other thing I found out too. They've got these capabilities now. You can download, you can download all kinds of books now. It's amazing.
So just to add a little bit more to this, and then I have a couple other questions. So I always remind people, we had two members of Congress who addressed the group in the beginning. Their offices are there to help. They have staff in their district office and regional offices. They are there to help. Don't worry if you didn't vote for that member or not. Okay, that's not about that. It's like if you need a service, if you're in a situation where in this time you're not able to figure out how to apply for these disaster loans or this PPP, or whatever happened to the unemployment, or you're not getting any kind of Wi-Fi connection in your community, I encourage you to contact your member of Congress. It's important that they hear about what is needed in their community. That they're here for us. They don't know what else is needed unless they hear from you. They're all individually on different committees, as you heard, and as you're familiar with it. But don't be shy. Don't be shy at all about reaching and connecting with them and letting them know, hey, we live in a certain community, or this happened, and reach out to their offices, because they're always there to help and help navigate. I kind of consider them some very high profile, very fancy concierge services. So make sure that you reach out to them when you need to. A couple of other questions here. There's one here in regards to, so we're in a situation now where it's more private companies can play a huge role on the future work in technology. But where does the government come in? In particular, we've seen, the stimulus packages or different things like that to help out, but not all industries are capable to go remote. Is there some space for the government to accelerate any of this process or progress, and what does that look like? I think that's more channeled to Yesenia.
Sure. I think every government has an opportunity to really, kind of to put its listening hat on, right? What for the citizens that they serve, what are the most pressing needs according to the citizens? Often, there are lots of, everyone has an interest, right? There are multiple stakes, kind of at play, but to truly be able to bring together citizen advocacy and the nonprofit sector and the education sector and actual citizens to help inform what are the needs of the communities. And right now they vary community by community, right? We know that geography and economics and, have a lot to do with, with how citizens are faring. And so it's not a one size fits all solution. And therefore there needs to be, kind of a refocus, a reframing of what are our citizens asking for, and, and to answer them, right? For that need to be as important as the business sector need, right? Or, or the next election or anything else, right? So citizen-centric listening for priorities, right? Because they will often tell you, right? Like I would not mind having my data shared if it means that I can do more transactions online, right? Because it makes sense, right? Like involve them in the dialogue about what are the options available in this next generation of services to citizens. That's one way, right? That government can really respond to the needs of the community is to truly engage them and to be willing to take action based on, citizen recommendations.
Okay. Checking the time here. So this next question here is in regards to employees kind of at any age is, so what can maybe some of you share with us that we can do moving forward to check on the mental health and wellness of employees, our fellow colleagues, and we're also in a situation where there's some people who are, it's happened to me, it's happened to others, that I got a phone call from a friend who is in a different state and said, she's living by herself. She's gotten a little lonely, and she's who I consider also a top executive in her company. So it's not like it's just high school kids or college kids or a certain age. What are you seeing that maybe your companies are doing, or some tips that you can suggest in terms of wellness and just overall well-being that we can help each other out?
I can share what, some of the things that we're doing and that I'm seeing in our, in our workplaces. We are opening meetings with, with a space, right, carved off to ask, how are we doing? And, and this, we're not pushing through, we're not railroading, the ability to check in with one another before we start the meeting. And we're also asking ourselves, who's not here? Right, it's like, because again, in the busyness of this new work environment, we need to be very conscientious of, who's not here, right? Who might be on the meeting but isn't speaking up, who normally is very vocal, who is missing from the meeting altogether, right? Have we noticed that someone hasn't been able to make, a few calls, and then just creating the space within the meeting that and I think I'm seeing this incredible openness from our, from our workforce in saying, I'm really challenged today with this, and I need to take either a conversation offline. We're giving each other a whole lot more flexibility to be able to say, this is not the time that I can engage in this topic. So I think there's a lot more flexibility in the workplace. I think we are opening and allowing more of our humanity to come into meetings. We are creating space for, conversations that need to be private, We are opening up and rethinking our support services, our employee benefits, so that they have the support that they need, because we all recognize that mental health and mental wellness now has to be something that we are embedding actively, visibly in the workday, so that it doesn't become an issue, a hidden issue, right, that hits us later on. So those are a few of the things that I've seen. And then on the personal side, one of the things that I've started to do is, when I am in private conversations, is I am talking about mental health among Hispanics. Like, this is not a topic we're comfortable with. It is not a topic that, that we don't know how to talk about, our challenges, right? We still have that stoicism about us. So I'm just saying, listen, I'm not well today. This is what I'm struggling with. And it really does open the door for others to be, to be able to take that, that mask off, that persona off of, we can do anything, we can, but we also need to be real about what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Anybody
So
else?
one of the things that we're seeing at Gartner, we're a global company. So in a sense, those of you listening here, maybe if you were in the State Department or the military, you've got global outposts. So what we found is that there are many parts of the world where people going to work is like their very best outcome, because they don't have really very good internet access or even facilities. Sometimes you'll see somebody who is living with a number of other people, and they're in a corner of a table in a kitchen, and they have to kind of walk sideways around the table just to move around because the space is so small. So we're dealing with that. I think in general, as Gartner as a company has pretty much always been a virtual company. Analysts have always worked out of the home. We traveled quite a bit. Of course, travel has been curtailed for a number of months and probably largely to the end of the year. But even with that, at least as a culture, we've adopted how to do that. With the lockdown, one of the things that we've started seeing proliferate is the idea of the virtual happy hour, where people get together and get the beverage of your choice. It doesn't have to be an adult beverage, be whatever you want. It could be coffee, but just give a chance for you to just kind of share and talk the way they might have if they were meeting in an office in the hallway and talking that way. And, it's not in any way a perfect solution, but we're still feeling our way around. How do we make this even better than it is now? And I would say the additional piece about the part I mentioned earlier, but the personal resources of some of your associates may not be at a level where they have much to go with to participate, and might need to just consider finding some ways that they can get a better way to connect into your company or your agency.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I thought this was a virtual happy hour. This is like my third glass here, so I'm not sure. I must have catch the memo. No, I'm just kidding.
There's a time zone that you're in, David, right?
Maybe that's the next one. We'll do the virtual happy hour on top of that. No, there's just water in there. No, the virtual happy hours is great. And the other thing I'm starting to see is like, I think we as leaders, right? CHLI is about leadership, right? We need to be more celebratory, right? And although we're not, in person, right? But you can go in the chat window and find excuses to celebrate anything, and you can pump it in the chat rooms when you're on things. So I'm seeing a lot more use of these chat rooms on the side to kind of pump up just create an environment of celebration, right? I mean, which is something I think you miss as much when you're not in person, which is important. And I'd say just on a personal note, I mean, there's a lot of different apps out there for wellness and stuff, but one I use is called Hallow, and it's focused just on Christianity, and it's just diving more deep into prayer and using just some fundamentals of prayer that have been kind of throughout history have been well. And I think that's another element. I think that, at least for me personally, improves my wellness and helps me kind of get through this time. And I would encourage those, and there's a lot of ones out there, right? But to also look for strength and spirituality, which I think will help as well.
So I've got one more question. I think one or two maybe here, but this next one kind of along the path here of the humanity and the interaction. it's a long question, but I'm going to read it because it's rich in the question. And this goes to some of the Silicon Valley companies that have, they have announced that they're allowing people to work from home for the rest of the year and maybe even beyond that, right? If you weren't already working from home. So that leads to a loss of mentorship, that in-person interaction, that office interaction, that maybe wasn't always kind of mandatory, but you knew that it was there and you knew you could engage that way. So that does lead to that loss there. But is there an upside to that? So for example, with insurance or entry-level professionals, is there an upside where maybe they can engage with senior colleagues or others a little more often than, or easier than they would have before? I mean, David, your point about people jumping on the chat, right? I mean, sometimes it's like sometimes you share a lot with a stranger, it's kind of a similar concept in that. The question is here in regards to that level of engagement, and is there an opportunity? And if there is, what is some advice, for those who are now not in a situation where they're not around their immediate supervisor or their mentor? What do they do? How do they engage?
Marianne, I'll start, because one of the things one of the things that Accenture does to create community is we host what we call leadership summits for our African American and Hispanic American employee resource groups in the summer, and ours is coming up in July. And these are big events, and they're exactly that. It's an opportunity for a closer connection over a 2-day seminar for leadership, mentorship, coaching opportunities day of, and then lasting relationships, right, that continue through time. And so that's what I would encourage, kind of for organizations is we are often the ones that make up our mind that someone else is too busy to take our phone call, or to, that we are too low on the totem pole, whatever imagery we use, that someone would not be interested in coaching or mentoring us. And yet on the other side, leadership is at every meeting saying, I have an open door policy, if you need to talk to me, right? So we need to stop filtering ourselves out of leadership, coaching, and mentoring opportunities. If someone says you are welcome to reach out to me, take them at their word, right? They have said it not inauthentically. They have said, I am here for you. And often we are the ones that say no to ourselves the loudest and first, right? So we have got to be, we have got to create that, have the courage and send the ask, put the ask out there to the leader. And then once that person accepts it, right, then my coaching to the participant would be focused about the conversation, be thoughtful about what are the 1 or 2 topics that you are seeking coaching or mentoring on, and present that as, as here is what I am looking to work on. Do you have the time, and are you willing to work with me on this? Like, make the ask. It's like sales, right? You gotta ask for, you gotta close the deal. And I think often we approach the ask for coaching and mentoring very hesitantly, right? Very scared that we're going to be rejected. And so my advice is be bold, ask for it, right? Ask the individual that you seek to create that relationship with for the time, but be structured about it. Say, these are the topics, the 1 or 2 that I'm interested in entering into a dialogue with you. I would like to talk every 2 weeks or once a month for 3 months. Be specific about the ask, so that person then can make the decision that they can enter into that dialogue with you. But don't leave it to chance, and don't leave it unstructured. Give them an opportunity to know the size of the box, so that they can be thoughtful about their response to you in the ability to join you on that mentorship or coaching journey.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of times too, culturally, right? We aren't always asking elders. We kind of wait for them to lead, and we're busy doing our work. And so there's some cultural aspects to that potential engagement as well. And to your point, I encourage also young professionals, interns, even entry level employees, where you can and where there's a natural, organic, or if you have to kind of pull it together, is create some type of informal group. Like with our internship program, there's an immediate cohort that is there for each other. Whether if you are doing some onboarding and your new employees, maybe there's a way that they can engage and kind of be there for each other. Sometimes asking in a little bit of a smaller group is less intimidating. Maybe that helps Yesenia, to your point, to kind of figure out what to say, how to ask, and then be bold and ask. So it definitely is an opportunity to do that as well. I'm checking the time here because I know I need to be introducing our keynote speaker in a minute or so, and I don't think he's on yet. So any closing remarks from our panelists, or any closing thoughts before we pivot to our keynote speaker? Jorge, why don't you go first, dear? Jorge, do you have anything to add?
Oh, well, yeah, I was thinking that one of the things that we're learning, certainly at Gartner, we're an entire culture that was built out of expert analysts, which means that they were more senior from the beginning. That's a difficult culture to scale, a business model to scale. So we've actually begun over the last 3 years to recruit much younger, very bright, talented people, and essentially coach them. And so we assign mentors to these, but also we're encouraging the senior people to open up and say, see if there's someone you can encourage and help who's starting out in the business, so they can have a better idea of how they can develop themselves. But maybe one more point here in closing for in terms of what Yesenia was talking about, is that what I find is just about every business is a people business, and they're looking for leaders. They want someone to stand up. I fully applaud the idea of being bold, because that's in fact what what they're looking for. And sometimes it's difficult to realize that boldness and that assertiveness is something that you're willing to go out on a limb and take a risk to go and make something happen on behalf of your company, or on behalf of your organization. That's exactly what they're looking for. And so please don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. David, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in closing, CHLI's about leadership, and I think, I am an optimist, right? I believe that, challenges are going to come our way, and it's how we work through them and how we're agile and how we lead in those challenges, right? And I think being optimistic and always looking at the bright side of things and leading and inspiring, our teams and the people that we work with and the people that we're around and our community, to move forward and what's ahead, or in Spanish, what's adelante or pa'lante, right? I think to me, it's just it's a key part of that. When I look at this leadership series that we're doing in technology, right? I mean, it is where the future is going. There's a lot, I think what this great panel has shared a lot of different perspectives that I think those listening can take with them some nuggets that I think can really help turbocharge your career, your role, and really help inspire members of our community. So thank you for the opportunity, Marianne.
Thank you, David. So I see that our keynote speaker has joined us. So if we were all together, I would ask for a round of applause for all of our panelists. And thank you again, for Jorge, Yesenia, and David. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to introduce now our keynote speaker. So it's my honor today to introduce Mathew Lira, who serves as the Special Assistant to the President for Innovation, Policy, and Initiatives. He has worked across section of policy, government, and new digital economy. So he has developed several tech policy initiatives while working on Capitol Hill and the White House. So thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours, Mr. Lira.
Well, thank you for having me on today. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody. I just want to touch on a few points. I think maybe start with obviously the role of technology innovation in our society has long been sort of a catalyst for the forward progress and for creating more opportunity for for everyone in the nation and around the world. And so the way we've kind of looked at this is, how do we best use public policy to facilitate American leadership in what we call the industries of the future? And so we've done engagements with stakeholders throughout the United States in particular, but also around the world, around these once in a generation technological breakthroughs that unlock not only the leadership in the category they're specifically in, but also in things that no one could ever anticipate. And so, case in point, the creation of the GPS network and the development of smartphone technology, unlocks a future in that app ecosystem where, we're using, ride-sharing apps to hail our rides across town. And all of that innovation that has occurred around Uber and Lyft and all the others, Airbnb and the entire sharing economy, wasn't necessarily front of mind for the first engineers building a smartphone or for the first people launching satellites for the GPS network. But American leadership on those industries enabled the development of all these this broader community of industry and opportunity around it. So we have these, what we call these industries of the future, and these are areas, I think, relatively non-controversial areas, but important areas where the United States and our core closest allies, we want to work together to ensure that we continue to lead in them. And artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G, and advanced manufacturing. And so over the last several years, we've worked in a bipartisan way to prioritize research funding, and we've been able to work with congressional stakeholders to see consistent year-over-year increases in R&D funding for those priority areas. We've also worked with the academic community through our vehicles, as a government, National Science Foundation, NIH, and other places, to prioritize research in those areas, as they go through their grant-making process. So we've seen, a lot of ultimately progress at the R&D community and in the entrepreneurial community around those core technologies, and they remain priorities for the White House and for policymakers writ large. Again, it's one of the few things. One of the things, maybe I should have started with this, that I love about technology policy and I love about innovation policy is it's one of the perhaps all too few policies that seems to bring more people together than it seems to push them apart. And anyone that's on this call certainly is familiar enough with that policy discussion to know that that's very true. And that's certainly the attitude that I've brought to this role, and that I think a lot of my colleagues have as well. One other thing I'd like to highlight in terms of things that we've hopefully had a positive contribution on has been facilitating the modernization of certain regulation climates related to emerging technologies. And so two specific case studies. We work closely with the Department of Transportation to streamline the approval process for autonomous aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles. And as a result of that work, during this most recent crisis, you were able to see in California where drone delivery has been useful in delivering supplies, contactless supply delivery of critical medical supplies. Similarly, there's been work, and I know Congress continues to look at this area more broadly around autonomous vehicles on the ground as well. And so these are examples where regulations that may have made a whole heck of a lot of sense as it related to legacy technologies, and were put into place for good reason and actually had a generally a good impact on the technology, are unable to keep pace with the rapid changes that happen with new technologies. And we want to make sure that the United States remains a very favorable place for innovators, entrepreneurs, and others to deploy these new technologies, whether they be unmanned aerial vehicles, autonomous vehicles on the road, or a host of other technological areas that are in sort of highly regulated industries, where we can ensure that we have pathways to, with respect to people's privacy rights and for, of course, the safety of our communities, enable the development and deployment of those technologies right here at home. I can't pass up the opportunity to talk about this general subject area without talking just about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is the modernization of the delivery of government services. Again, this is probably the ultimate non-controversial issue, but something I care a lot about. And public policy debates they can be contentious, and people put a lot of work, time, and effort, whether it's through activism at the grassroots level, or the legislative policy debates that happen in Capitol buildings and the agency buildings, capitals all across the country. But oftentimes, where the rubber meets the road, are having the delivery of that digital service. So when we, as a country, decide on a policy, and we go through the sometimes contentious process of debating it and making the compromises, and then actually enacting that policy, and then you see the implementation of that policy doesn't always meet the expectations of the very people who believed in that it should be done. And I believe that this has this inhibits the public's faith in our national institutions, and it inhibits people's faith in the policy process itself. And so, sort of for those lofty goals of just democracy is good, but also, frankly, from the day-to-day realities of the people who depend on these programs, we want to make sure that we're working with agencies to improve the delivery of the service that they provide. It's obviously kind of the ultimate yeoman's work, perhaps, in government, but I think it's very important. And we've been, we took the attitude, and I think, at least the last several years, we wanted to build on the work of our predecessor with entities like the United States Digital Service, 18F, but also with a broader community of the federal technology ecosystem at agencies across the government for how can we do this better, and how can we use new technologies like cloud computing and process automation, and sort of take your pick of these latest technologies to ensure that we're providing people not just with a great customer experience or client experience, and that's obviously important, but so if you have a startup and you're able to move very quickly, that's your advantage. Your challenge is that your market share is really small, and you don't necessarily have the ability to impact a huge audience right away. Government is sort of the inverse, in that it's very difficult to move with agility. It might take you 3 weeks to get a simple change to a web form on the va.gov. But the upside is that if you make that change, you instantaneously save 5 million people 5 minutes each. And so I think, again, that's a small example, but those kinds of changes are happening every single day at agencies throughout the government, at offices all over the country, by patriots, real patriots, whether they be career civil servants who have devoted their life to these mission areas, or the most seasoned technology executives, engineers, designers who are coming in for a year to do their part. Again, it's the most inspirational thing you can ever see. So it's something that we care a lot about here, and that we've been proud to work very closely with a bipartisan coalition throughout the country to help be good stewards of those initiatives. And then lastly, for my remarks today, I'd like to touch on, obviously, the importance of making sure that this innovation, whether it be the work that's being done to modernize government agencies, or as I started with the development of industries of the future, I think we need to be very purposeful as policymakers and as stakeholders in this broader discussion to ensuring that we're maximizing the extent to which these opportunities are available to all communities in the United States, and frankly to the communities that we influence around the world. There's no law that says innovation has to be limited to 6 or 7 zip codes. And I think if you look throughout the history of American innovation in this country, obviously we've had challenges and continue to have challenges, but we are at our best when innovation is as geographically and culturally and sort of class and any kind of diversity you can think of. We are at our best when innovation is coming out of all of these places. And I think it should be our goal, and it's certainly something we think about here, is how can we leverage policy to maximize the reach of the opportunity that new technologies, new innovations create in our society. And so 2 tangible examples of efforts that we've undertaken. One is obviously prioritizing broadband access. I think broadband access is, if you can't access the modern economy, then how are you going to participate? How are you going to lead in it? And so, we've worked with congressional stakeholders and again with agency stakeholders to increase funding. And you've seen initiatives at several agencies. Those of you familiar with the telco space, you'll know if I mention one and then forget one, it's sort of the end of the world. So I better mention none. But you know all the agency letters and acronyms, and they're all doing really great work. And so we've really trying to double down on a lot of those investments in enabling the broadband, the expansion of broadband availability to every community in the United States. Second one I'd like to highlight is the opportunity zones. They've now been out in the wild for several years. I think they've been a tremendous success story at increasing the availability of particularly capital allocation to diverse set of communities around the country. And that story is just beginning. If you look at the arc of that authorization, we're looking at sort of decade plus time frame, and hopefully generational impact that will come out of that. And we have a really dedicated team here, the National Economic Council and the Domestic Policy Council, my colleagues, who are remain focused on making sure that those implementations are going well, even though the bill signing is sort of a distant memory at this point. And the third area I'd like to touch on as something where we've hopefully made some progress, but I think there's more work to be done, is on code literacy. And the way I think about code literacy is similar to just general literacy. Not everyone who studies English or English class necessarily becomes a poet. I am proof of this. I once made that statement to a former boss of mine, and he laughed at me and said, "No one's going to confuse you for a poet." So I tried to prove him wrong. I wrote a poem. I sent it to 100 literacy poem journals. I even knew the editor of one of them, by the way. Rejected 100 times. So I am definitely not a poet. But I still studied grammar. I still studied language. I still try to understand literature, even though I myself apparently am not a poet. And I think code literacy is the same way. There's the lost Einstein argument. If someone's not exposed to coding or computer science, then that could be the next great engineer. That's definitely true. But I think even for those people who never go into computer science, who never go into the tech industry, just understanding how the world works around them, how these algorithms work that control the news feeds, how the advertising is working, the fundamental literacy, a form of literacy. It's something we've done a lot of work on. The Department of Education has increased the grant program about $400 million a year for for training teachers. I think it's one of the gaps. If you look at previous efforts, again, they all made progress. One of the lessons learned, the honest lesson that was learned, was that if you sort of give more funding to communities, places where they have good teachers that already know how to teach computer science do better. But communities that don't have necessarily that skill set among their teachers, oftentimes, they'll go buy an iPad, go buy a Microsoft Surface or take your pick, and that's good, but it doesn't fundamentally improve the scoring on the actual subject matter. And so, putting that investment into the training of the teachers again around the country is something that we've put some effort in, where the administration was able to put some funding into. But again, as I say, there's more work to be done there. So. One of the dangers of a Zoom call is that unlike being in person, is that it's harder for me to see when people's eyes are glazing over. So I want to be proactive about that and recognize that my time is coming to an end here for these remarks. But again, I just want to stress there's a lot of issues which, again, in a democracy, you want to have very passionate debates. That is a healthy thing. But technology and innovation have been something that have united this country. They will continue to unite this country. And I think even in Washington, we've been able to make progress with some policy wins in this area. And it's something that we're very committed to continuing to do as long as we have the privilege and the opportunity to do it. So thank you again for having me on today, and I'll hand it back to our hosts.
All righty. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So thank you again, Mathew, Lira. Totally appreciate that. On behalf of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. For sharing with us your points of view on the broadband access, the opportunity zones, and the code literacy. Took some notes. Hopefully we can have a Tech Talk 2.0 later on, so we can maybe do a little deeper dive in some of these areas of interest and topic and concern that we have going on. This wraps up our 2020 Tech Talk. Another shout out and thank you to all of you for joining us, especially Jorge, Yesenia, and David. Thank you very much, Accenture, for the support for the annual commitment to this Tech Talk conversation. And to the team at CHLI, Diego, Michelle, Nick, Hunter, Jasmine, thank you so much for all of the help in getting all of this coordinated for our first um, briefing via Zoom. Before I close, I just want to share with you again, if we were not able to get to some of your questions, we will get to them after through a Q&A that we can send out afterwards. Also want to share with you that we have our annual CHLI Future Leaders Conference coming up next month in July, on July 23rd. So I encourage you to follow us in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Make sure you sign up for our newsletters and for the announcements so that you can learn about the upcoming programs, including the Future Leaders Conference. And with that, thank you so much. God bless. Have a nice evening.